Sport? Who doesn't love sport? It's not like much has happened this week, but if you weren't captivated by the sight of a crying Argentine, a dazzling Brazilian, and the beautiful chemistry between a ball boy and a Liverpudlian defender, you should probably get checked out. Today we have more substance than the UEFA ticket allocation, with another jam-packed show. We've got lionesses, we've got boycotts, and we have got one powerful speaker in the form of our latest star guest. Welcome to SportSpiel. Hello listeners, and welcome to episode 38, brought to you from inside the smooth confines of King's Place in London. It's a very warm welcome from me and from my delirious, Liverpool supporting co-host, Will Moulton. How's life been this week?
Not much has happened, really.
No, nothing at all?
Tuesday night was quite quiet.
Apparently. I mean, I heard there was a game on or something, and
yes, my housemate knew there was a game on because I was squealing so much.
Squealing?
Yes.
Wow, what kind of noises did you make?
It was more of I was trying. So I knew he was recording a video CV, so I was trying to be quiet when I celebrated, but it sort of came out. It was like roars, like yes.
As a fan, because obviously I know what it's like watching that game from a neutral's perspective, but what's it like being an actual fan invested in the result?
Horrible. Utterly horrible. When it was 1-0 at half time, I was thinking, I'll take this at full time. I always thought Liverpool were going to win. I said to everyone it would be a 2-1 Liverpool win, and I'd take that. So when it was 1-0 at half time, I was like, playing well, can't complain. If you're going to get knocked out, it could be worse ways to do it. And then Wijnaldum did his thing, and then beautiful Trent. Incredible.
And what was your reaction when that fourth goal went in?
I didn't actually say anything. I just sort of put my head in my hands and just collapsed on my bed, and I was just like, what has just happened?
It was just the quick thinking behind it that was just so damn impressive from my perspective.
It was like he was listening to the commentator praising him for his maturity, produced that pass, thanks to the ball boy as well, for obviously putting the ball in the right place very quickly, and clearly Divock managed to hear the cry over the sound of the cop and produced a finish. It was perfect, but the last 20 minutes or so holding on were horrible, especially when they have Messi in their team. You just think they're going to score. So the fact that I didn't, I was a very happy man.
Yes, I can imagine. Sadly, no similar excitement on the football front from me. I was at the FA Cup final, the Women's FA Cup final last week, to watch or cheer on West Ham against Man City. Ultimately, finished 3-0 to Man City, but considering it was West Ham's first season in the WSL, no one expected them to get to the FA Cup final in the first place. They more than held their own against City for a good 75-80 minutes. Probably should have equalised after the first goal went in, but eventually when you start pushing for the equaliser, you leave gaps at the back, and that's ultimately what happened. Yeah,
ultimately the score will say 3-0, but after 80 minutes it was 1-0. West Ham was still in the game, and they haven't got the money to compete with Man City, so to have done what they've done this season
can hold
brilliant.
Their heads high. I also last week met Dougie from McFly. For any McFly fans out there, he was DJing in Chelmsford, and I got a selfie with him. So that's, bucket list ticked. But anyway, what have we got for you, the listeners, on today's show? Well, first up is our feature interview with the wonderful para-archer Danielle Brown. After that, in part 2 of the show, we will bring you the important headlines in our news roundup before we dive into our discussion section where we chat about the England squad announcement for the Women's World Cup. All of that is to come, but first it's time for Will Moulton to introduce his latest interview guest.
Once again, we broaden our horizons on SportSpiel, reaching into another sport, this time para-archery. And this is an athlete I've admired for a long time, especially since London 2012, when she won that famous gold medal against her teammate Mel Clark in one of the tensest finals you will ever watch. Famous also for her pink hat, which I think everyone remembers, and is actually part of her logo now. We talk about that and many more things. We talk about mental strength in sport and how she is now teaching mental resilience to children to help them, not just in sport, but help them in education, pass exams and things like that. A truly inspirational speaker, especially given that when she first started doing motivational talks, she hated it. And just a brilliant individual. It's a really engaging listen. Enjoy. That's all I can say. Hello listeners, and welcome back to SportSpiel, where once again it is time for us to delve into the life and career of an elite athlete. This week we are very lucky to be joined by one of the country's greatest ever archers and two-time Paralympic champion Danielle Brown. So first of all, welcome to the show, Danielle, and thank you so much for coming on to speak to us.
Thanks, it's great to be invited.
We must also say thank you to one of our partners in the Mintridge Foundation for helping to arrange this interview, as Danielle is one of their ambassadors. And I guess this is the perfect place to start our interview, as you are currently in training for the Great East Swim, where you'll be raising money for Mintridge. So first of all, how is training going ahead of the event?
Well, it is going. I am swimming quite a bit, and I haven't actually done the open water bit yet. I'm looking to do that on Saturday, so a little bit nervous about that. I've never done it before, so I'm not quite sure how I'm going to react. With my disability, I do struggle with the cold. So this challenge is going to be really quite a big one for me, but I am looking forward to seeing how to adapt to all those challenges and make sure I manage it on the day.
And you say there you've not swum in open water before, so why this particular challenge?
I think because I think in order to sort of really stretch yourself professionally, I think it's really important to also challenge yourself personally. And last year I did a half marathon and a handbike, which was really, really fun. And I loved it. You know, it was so different to archery that the whole event itself was just so different. You know, archery is very quiet and focused. And it was just amazing going around the course and everyone cheering, and it was just so much fun. And this, again, is another challenge completely out of my comfort zone, and I just wanted to push myself really to see if I can do it. I'm sure I can. It's just sort of learning how to rise to it. And also really wanted to help the Mintridge Foundation, because they are an absolutely fantastic charity and do some brilliant work.
And how did you get involved with Mintridge in the first place?
Well, Alex from the Mintridge Foundation, the managing director, actually saw an article on me in the newspaper. So she just, on the back of that, I think it was a BBC news article, she got in touch and sort of said, can we meet? And I just really, really love the ethos behind it, what they're trying to achieve, what they're doing. So signed up to join with them, and I think I'm on my third year now with them, which is brilliant.
And how amazing is it to see not just the team grow, and Alex winning the Sunday Times Sportswoman of the Year, but also just to see the incredible work they're doing within schools and helping children.
Oh, it's amazing. It really is. I'm sort of a huge advocate of sport, not just in terms of your physical and mental health, but it teaches so many skills and strategies for life. And, you know, we always hear about the budget cuts and sort of sports, one of the first things to fall off the radar. So, you know, this charity really is very, very much needed, and it's providing a great opportunity for young people to learn all these really important skills.
And you yourself don't just do work with Mintridge with children, but you also do a lot of other things with your own business. I guess sort of how and why did you get into this line of work?
Yeah, so I've got my own business, which I set up when I retired from sport, and the reason I did it was my exit from sport was completely, it was pretty much an overnight thing. I failed my classification under the new rules, so pretty much overnight I had to go out and find a new way of life and working my way back up to the top. You know, I think when you've been world number one for 8 years, just that thought was absolutely soul destroying. So I had this idea of a business. Really, it was about taking a lot of what I'd learned from sport and applying it to the education sector, the corporate sector initially. And I've sort of really evolved from that and sort of moved down into diversity and inclusion. And I just find it so rewarding. You know, it's great being able to put something back and help people.
And one thing I noticed in particular you talking about was using your experiences of performing under pressure in sport in terms of exams. Is that something that's really applicable?
Absolutely, yeah, and I'm really excited. Actually, I'm just launching my online program for schools, which is all about that, about exam performance and about mental health as well. Because I think what you learn as an athlete, the ability to perform under pressure and the ability to control nerves, really helped when I was in education. And I remember at university, my housemates were all crying their eyes out in the lead up to the exams. And I thought, well, what's wrong? What's happened? And they were all crying, we're going to fail my exams and this, that and the other. And I thought, well, if you're out here crying, you're not in your room learning all the stuff you need to know to pass the exam. And what I realised through that was I'd learned all these amazing skills through sport that when it came to taking an exam, it didn't seem to affect me as adversely as a lot of my peers. And I was able to go in there and deliver results in very much the same way as I was in sport. So being able to help students and pass these techniques and strategies and tools on works so well.
And am I right in thinking that you're not just trying to boost exam results, but you're also trying to create all-round individuals as well, with a strong mental state of mind?
Yeah, that's correct. I think and my mentality as an athlete and again in business, what I've done really is sort of copied and pasted from that sector and just transferred it over. And I think that in order to get the most out of you as a professional, whether that's as a student, whether that's in the corporate sector, you have to get the most out of you as a person. So you've got to get that bit right first. And I think people really need to invest in themselves and innovate themselves before they look to external things like more resources, new technology. It's about looking at you. So creating that well-rounded individual is so super important. And I've sort of created this journey for success for schools, which starts on working on the students as an individual person to try and develop things like resilience, confidence, self-awareness, and really start to understand their identity. So your identity and authenticity and being able to transfer that into behaviours is so important when it comes to success in any field.
And I guess for you, it must be so great when the children do take on board exactly what you're saying and do change as individuals. It must be a really rewarding feeling.
Oh, honestly, that feeling is better than winning gold medals. It really is. When you sort of get feedback from them saying, I was so nervous, I was throwing up, I felt really, really ill, and then and I completely failed last year, but after going through your session and working on these strategies, I've really turned it around. I'm going to university. It's just incredible.
It's also not just children that you spend a lot of time with and you help. You also do a lot of motivational speaking for older people and for companies. And is that something you ever imagined yourself falling into as a career, or is it something that once the archery sort of had to stop, you just thought, I want to give something back and I want to help people?
Yeah, if I'm honest, I definitely never imagined myself doing it. I remember at school, I absolutely hated standing up and speaking in front of people. It terrified me so much. But through the sport, after Beijing, I actually started getting invited to all these events. And it just kind of happened quite naturally. People wanted me to speak, and I had no idea what I was doing. So I just kind of made it up as I went along. And actually found that I really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed not just talking about myself, it's more the messages and the strategies that you can pass on that makes a difference to other people. So if people can learn things from my story that really helps them in their life, that's just incredible. So yeah, I do speak with the keynote speaking. I do work a lot in the corporate sector, so I specialise really in around performance mindset, but a lot of it's around breaking through barriers, particularly for underrepresented groups.
And you talked about performance mindset there. Obviously, in many fields, especially in sport, there's the whole nature versus nurture debate. But I guess you're trying to say that actually mental strength is the most important thing in order to succeed. Is that correct?
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, there are lots of factors, but I would say that your mental strength, your mental toughness, and that whole holistic mental approach is more important. And I think people predominantly see sport as being a sort of very physical thing, and it is. But if you don't have the ability to transfer that into a competition and be able to deliver when you're under pressure, then you're wasting all that time in practice. So absolutely, that the mental side is so hugely, fundamentally important.
And in terms of mental strength in your own career, I mean, the records you hold and the performances you put out there were almost second to none. And I guess it really showed your mental strength in that Paralympic final of London 2012. I guess just talk us through that. It was such a tense affair, and what was going through your mind throughout it.
Yeah, do you know what? It was so tense. I think it wasn't just the actual match, it was the whole lead up to it, you know. I think a lot of people talk about being a home crowd advantage, but in many ways I actually thought it was a home crowd disadvantage. You know, so I was so proud to be there and so excited it was in London. But equally, you know, I actually ended up getting rid of all social media apps from my phone, because I'd look at my phone to find out what time it was. You got hundreds of messages, which was amazing, but it just piled that pressure on and on and on. And, you know, in archery, it's one of those sports that you want to try and keep your heart rate down, but you go out there to the music, the clapping, and it's climbing back up and you're trying to push it back down. So it was really, really tense in terms of that whole build-up. But that actual match, I mean, it came down to the last arrow. And I was shooting against my teammate, you know, and she's very good under pressure, you know. Over the long distances, I've been miles and miles and miles ahead, but 15 arrows in the matches really is anybody's game, and you've got to keep on the ball. So when it came down to the last arrow, it really could have gone any way, and ultimately that last arrow was who could deal with pressure better, and I sneaked mine closer to the middle. So yeah, it was awesome, but really, really nerve-wracking.
I can imagine there was a lot of relief when it was all over as well.
Yes, yeah. It's such a roller coaster of emotions, you know, and I think they all hit you at once. You've got that relief was actually so overwhelming, because this is the thing I've been working for 4 years, and I've actually done it. There was you're obviously really happy and proud, but then there's so many things going on. You've got to get out onto the podium, you've got drug testers following you, you've got to go to the media. So it was just absolutely bonkers at the same time, but so amazing.
And that came obviously 4 years after you won your first Paralympic title in Beijing. Was it quite a different experience winning that second one?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and it really showed actually how much Paralympic movement had come in 4 years. I did nothing different, you know. In fact, I actually probably shot better in Beijing than I did in London. And after Beijing, after winning there, I had 2 media interviews. After winning in London, I had 2 full days of media interviews.
Wow.
You know, I know it was absolutely bonkers, and I suppose the fact that the people there, it was the first time that my friends and family ever saw me compete internationally as well. So to have them there made it really, really special. And
you spoke there about the growth of the Paralympic movement. A lot of people see London 2012 as a big game changer. Is that something that you found has had a lasting impact on people's views of disability sport, of Paralympic sport?
Yeah, I think it's really changed the landscape in many, many ways. And I think that it has made people aware of the Paralympics. It's made people aware of what people can do, that there are lots and lots of sports out there, and actually that there are some really, really amazing athletes performing. It's not about their disability, it's about their ability and what they can do, which is brilliant. I think obviously there are lots of things that we still need to improve, but for me, I think taking time and celebrating success and really saying, wow, you know, we have come such a long way is really, really important thing to do on that journey as you move forward.
Absolutely, and I guess we saw with the growth continue with Paralympic sport in London 2017 at the Athletics Championships, and we've got the para swimming coming to London again this year. How important is is Britain in terms of keeping that momentum going and keeping people interested in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is brilliant that we are hosting more, and it's also great that I think pre-London, unless you actually went and looked for it, you wouldn't really know that events were being held or where they were being held. So that now the media has picked up on it a lot more and doing more to promote and publicise it. But yeah, having more events and getting people to come and watch it and be spectators and really support it is a very, very important part of Paralympic sport. You know, the more it becomes a sort of product that people want to see, want to watch, the more coverage it's going to get, the better it's going to become, the stronger it's going to become.
And you mentioned media coverage there. Obviously, with an increase of media coverage comes the increased scrutiny on the sport. And a big discussion topic is classification changes, and it has been for a few years. And that's something that really impacted on you. I guess if you could just sort of explain what happened to you and the overnight impact.
Yeah, so after London, they changed the rules around classification. So we knew that this rule change was happening, and what happened was at the World Championships the following year, we were out in Bangkok, we were told that the athletes would be reclassified after the event. So the test is a physio test to determine muscle strength and movement. And I'd always passed. My condition really does manifest itself in pain, but it is a neurological condition that does affect other areas, including my muscle strength and my range of movement as well. So I thought I would get through because there'd never been an issue before, but the test was really quite humiliating and very horrendously painful. They were pushing and pulling me around. I was in so much pain, and then when I was unable to walk away from the physio bed, the classifiers asked me why I was pretending to be paralysed, which wasn't ideal. And the next day I learned that I'd failed, and it was just one of those moments where you're told this is your dream, this is your life, it's your career, and you're like, well, what do I do now? I think that was my first reaction, and our team physio said, with a CV like yours, I'm sure you won't find it difficult to get a job. And because we were out in Bangkok, my national governing body wouldn't let me ring home to tell my parents that I'd failed. I was getting on a plane to go to New Zealand to train in the summer out there over the British winter. Mm-hmm. And I was told that I couldn't tell anybody until the UK media reported the story. So, yeah, it was one of those things. I think I went through that whole grief cycle. You know, I was shocked. I was stunned. I spent an entire plane journey bursting into tears. I didn't really know what to do. My whole identity was tied up in the sport. It was really horrendously bad, and I felt that it was really, really badly dealt with by my national governing body at the time as well. And I mean, looking back at it now, you know, I suppose at the time I was quite bitter and resentful, and now I guess there were lots of things that they could have done better, and they could have supported me better, but I think it was a new experience for them as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, it was sort of very hard all round.
Yeah, I can imagine that. That sounds horrible. And one thing you mentioned in there was the classification tested itself. And this is unfortunately a story we've heard a few times about how humiliating and embarrassing and painful it can be. And I guess is that the only way they can test you, or is this something that, you know, they really need to change?
Well, I think they do need to look at the classification process, and I'm sure there's probably more scientific tests than, I mean, for me, they were grabbing my feet, which are very, very painful to the touch, and squeezing them and saying you shouldn't be feeling pain because you wear socks and shoes. Which, you know, I've spent years and years and years trying to develop a tolerance, and sort of spent a lot of time desensitizing. You know, so I felt that there was a real lack of understanding, and surely there's got to be a more scientific approach they can take. But ultimately, I did appeal and protest the decisions, and they decided that my condition, along with a few other invisible conditions, is no no longer eligible for Paralympic sport, which I think should be seriously looked at. You know, for me, everyone should be assessed on the merits of the case, and you shouldn't be excluded because you've got a particular type of disability.
Absolutely, and I guess that must have been a massive sort of a step backwards for you. And you spoke previously about the grief. Once that sort of you'd overcome that and you sort of realised that the appeal had gone through and things hadn't changed, how did you sort of cope with moving forward after that?
I think it was about resetting my purpose. You know, my whole identity had changed. I was an elite athlete, but I wasn't. I'm a disabled person, but I wasn't disabled enough. So that the whole fundamental core of who I wasn't there anymore, and that was really, really hard. So understanding who I was away from the bow and the arrows, and really understanding that my identity doesn't have to be so intrinsically linked to my disability, and investing that time in myself, getting to know myself, getting to understand more about my values away from sport was absolutely a big game changer. And then it was resetting that purpose. You know, I had a mortgage to pay, I got to get an income in, and for me, setting up my own business, when I sort of looked at myself and took that holistic view, that made the most sense. Here I could do something that was challenging and rewarding and pushing myself out of my comfort zone like I had done in sport, but I was also able to help other people, which was sort of a really, really important value and ethos for me.
Of course, and you mentioned something there about not letting your sort of disability define you, and I guess I saw a tweet that went out, I think it was yesterday, the Women in Sport talked about the non-sporty badge, and you mentioned that you'd had sort of issues with that in the past. Is that something that we need to address and we need to be educated on as the public, that just because you're slightly different to us doesn't mean that you're not sporty or you're not musical or you're not academic?
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's sort of, I guess I do a lot of that in terms of my work now around stereotyping. I think a lot of it, is around stereotypes that people put on people, but it's also what you as an individual can do against those. So I think everybody has the capacity to achieve great things, and we've all got different interests. You know, the world would be really boring if everyone was interested in sport or everyone was interested in art or science, you know, and I think it's really important to sort of understand and not make assumptions that just because somebody can't do something, you know, I can't walk very far, I can't run, but that doesn't mean that I can't do sport. And that was something that my PE teachers got very, very wrong. My mum ended up pulling me out of sport, out of PE, because they kept trying to force me to do stuff that I couldn't do, and I was in so much pain, but they weren't able to sort of help me find another way round. So I think a lot of it with that is being sort of quite creative in your approach, thinking out of the box and looking at what we can do, but also being very inclusive. There are lots and lots of ways that you can make sport inclusive, that you don't have to segregate people with disabilities and have a disability-only club. You know, I suppose one of the reasons I got into archery was because I wanted to do a sport. I didn't want to go to a club for people with disabilities. I wanted to just go to a club for people. And that's what I sort of really, really benefited from with archery in particular.
And that was something I was going to come on to, because I remember reading how sporty you were as a child. Was it always a case of, once this sort of condition had manifested itself, you were always going to try and find something to continue your love of sport?
Do you know, I've got really amazing parents, and they were so wonderful and so supportive. And when it first happened, it took me 5 years to get a diagnosis. So you can probably tell I'm from the north with my accent. And after 5 years, we actually had to go to London, to Great Ormond Street, to get my diagnosis of complex regional pain syndrome. My first time to the capital city was to go to hospital, and through all that time, my parents kept pushing me to do sport because they didn't know what it was, and they were worried that if I didn't do sport, I'd lose muscle. So they kept pushing and pushing and pushing me. which sounds very cruel, and it felt that way at the time, but I'm really grateful they did. And when it became so impossible for me to walk very far, they got a canoe. So instead of going walking in the mountains, we could go canoeing on lakes. So I'm really, really fortunate that they were sort of that mindset, that it was about finding a way round. And that's what I did when I couldn't do some of the sports that I loved. I did a lot of running when I was younger. Never very good at it, but I enjoyed it. But when I couldn't do that, it was a case of like, what sport could I do, and sort of really thinking out the box. I'm sort of really grateful my parents had that mentality and instilled that in me.
And when you first tried archery, was it initially a case of, was it a sort of an instant love at first sight sort of thing, or did you have to take a little while to warm to it?
Oh, it was love at first sight. Well, as soon as I picked up the bow, it felt amazing. I was horrendously bad at it. Yeah, I mean, it was a miracle if I could hit the target, never mind the middle of it. But it was just so much fun. It was addictive. I was outside. I was doing something that I could do. And I don't know if you've ever tried it, but honestly, it's the most relaxing thing in the world. It doesn't matter what mood you're in. When you pick up a bow and start shooting arrows in the middle of the target, all those worries, whatever, just sort of melt away, and it just feels great. So I loved that feeling, and it took me 3 years to get on the Great Britain team, but a lot of that was practice. Doing it actually helped me in terms of my pain control, my pain management. So when I was doing that, it requires so much focus that I wasn't focusing on the pain I was in. So every evening I'd be begging my parents to take me to go and practice, and that's sort of how I got quite good at it.
And I guess it must make it even more rewarding then when you see, sort of by your own admission, that you weren't great on your first attempt, to then see what you achieved throughout your career. You were number one throughout, so many Paralympic titles and Paralympic world titles. I guess that must have, you must look back and be really proud of what you managed to achieve.
Yeah, that and making the able-bodied team, of course, for me that was a huge step up as well, because I think talking about those labels that we discussed before, and being defined by that disability, actually sort of, this was something that I was good at, and I could compete on a equal level playing field with the able-bodied. It was all about my ability, not my disability, and really sort of starting to see that limitless potential underneath just really, really helped me with my self-confidence, my self-esteem, my self-worth.
And you mentioned, obviously, competing alongside able-bodied athletes. You didn't just compete, you also won a Commonwealth title in 2010. How cool was that?
Oh, it was amazing. Completely unexpected. I mean, it was completely unexpected that I made the team. I was in the middle of my third year exams at university, and I literally got the qualifying score the day before the cut-off date, and I got asked if I wanted to go to the selection shoot, and I was going to turn it down because I was in the middle of my exams, and I'd just taken 10 days off to go to this training camp in Arizona. And my arm got twisted by my teammates. Go to the selection shoot. You don't know. And to be honest, playing with bows and arrows versus revision, it was a pretty clear contest, really. So I went along and actually won the first selection shoot. Then a month later, managed to sneak through in second place. So it just completely blew me away, shooting against these sort of really, really talented, amazing women in Great Britain on the able-bodied team, and actually being there at that level was amazing. And then going to the Commonwealth that I'd not even planned to do, coming away with gold, I really couldn't believe it.
I can imagine. And nowadays, if someone was to even going back to London when Oscar Pistorius competed in the able-bodied event, you didn't get as much coverage as I would say you deserved. Is that something that particularly you're worried about, or you just felt privileged to be able to compete and to win those titles?
Well, to be honest, I didn't really notice it. I think when I did get coverage, I think I was sort of really excited about the stuff that I did get. Paralympic archery is a really low-profile sport. And competing against things like athletics, like swimming, which is sort of much more in the mainstream, it was always going to be a tough shout. So getting media coverage, I mean, it is beneficial. You know, I do actually find raising my profile and trying to get that exposure is probably sort of one of the hardest things, doing what I'm doing, and compare that to some of the other sports and other athletes. But I've never felt that I deserve it more than other people.
Fair enough. And I mean, I know now that you've been a guest of ours on SportSpiel, we'll be doing everything to help boost your coverage. But one thing that really, when I think back to London 2012 when you were competing, one thing that really stands out is the hat that you were wearing. Is that something that, you know, a lot of people seem to recognise about you? And is that something that was a conscious decision, or was it just something you happened to be wearing that people picked up on?
Yeah, do you know what? It is something that lots of people picked up on, and in fact, I've actually got my pink hat incorporated into my logo, because when I go for business meetings after retiring, you know, when you go into a hotel lobby or a cafe and you're looking around and you're not quite sure what the other person looks like, and people kept saying to me, I didn't recognise you without your hat. So I ended up actually incorporating my hat into my logo. But it wasn't. It was one that I found. I liked the colour. I liked the fact that it made me stand out a little bit. It was a bit different, but it was also a really good fit, and it actually let the right amount of light in, so that the sight picture that I got was really, really clear. So I actually had to get the hats that we were provided for in London just weren't suitable, because they were a lot darker than I was used to. So I actually had to get a special permission to use that one in London, because it wasn't part of the regulation uniform.
Oh wow, I didn't realise. Well, it certainly will go down in your folklore forevermore. I guess you mentioned right at the start of the interview all these different challenges you're doing now with the handbike and with the swimming. Are you still doing any archery at all, or is that something you've left behind you for the moment?
So I'm doing a little bit more for fun. I do bits and pieces for film shoots, which is always great, but really sort of more teaching other people when I get the opportunity. So like through Mintridge, we do lots of archery programs there, which is great fun. But no, I've got my challenges. My business is taking up a lot of time. I've been busy writing books, so I've got a first one coming out in September, which very, very exciting about. So, but that's just taking up so much time that the archery has fallen on the wayside a little bit. But it's one of those sports that I can go back to, and I do hope to in the future.
And I was going to ask sort of what plans have you got coming up for the next few months, but it sounds like you're very busy. But any other challenges in the pipeline for future, sporting-wise?
Do you know what? I'd love to do more challenges. I'm not sure what. I'd love to maybe do a kayaking one, because I really like that. I mean, I was terrible at it when I've tried it before. In fact, my level 2 kayaking course, I actually got a certificate that achieved more swimming than canoeing. So, but yeah, I'd love to do something along those lines.
Well, I tell you what, we wish you all the very best, and we'll be giving you our full support throughout. Danielle, thank you so much for today. It's been a really fun, really enjoyable interview. You're a fantastic advocate for so many different things, and we wish you all the best going forward.
Thank you.
You're listening to SportSpiel, available on Audio Boom, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. A massive thank you to Danielle for taking the time out to speak with us on the show, and of course to the Mintridge Foundation for setting it up in the first place. But now we come to part 2 of the show, the news roundup, where myself and Will take it in turns to talk about an item of sports news that we think you, the listeners, should know about. We each get 2 minutes to talk about it, so it's very much a quick fire round. The infamous duck timer is at the ready, and this time, kicking off with the news roundup is Will Moulton.
Let's start with a negative story. Let's start with the bad stuff and build up to the positive stuff later on.
I like it.
So this weekend, AFC filed could create history and reach the Football League for the first time in their history when they take on Salford in the conference playoff final. However, it could all have been not possible a couple of years ago when former accountant Andrew Barnbrook had deceived the club out of £240,000, and this week he was jailed for 32 months after admitting stealing that money to fund online gambling, drugs, drink, etc. He spent £50,000 to £70,000 of that on buying luxury items for a webcam model that he believed he was in a relationship with. She just said it was purely business. And he would also spend £8 a minute on her services. That's a lot of money. He almost financially bankrupted the club back in January 2018, and they only survived because the club was owned by a large group, the Tangerine Holding Group, and they lent them the money. And now they're one win away from reaching the Football League, and are also in the FA Trophy final next week. They're not exactly the most popular of clubs, but it's always good to see that a football club can overcome such financial hardship, and that they can still survive, because there's so many clubs now who are folding, going under. We see the mess that is Bolton Wanderers at the moment. So it's good that a club that loses £240,000, which for a Premier League club is nothing, but for someone lower down the tier is a lot of money. And they can come back from that and survive. So best of luck to them in the playoff final today and the FA Trophy final.
Yep, like you said, lots of financial problems going on left, right and centre at quite a few clubs, Bolton being one of them, Hamilton up north for Scottish football fans, another club that has gone through some difficult financial periods at the moment as well. For my first story, I begin with a story that could be a real game changer really in the women's sport landscape, because on May the 2nd, several prominent female ice hockey players announced that they would forego participation in any professional leagues in North America this season. Over 200 players are part of the boycott, and they've decided to sit out the season until they, quote, get the resources professional hockey demands and deserves. Among the players, there are several stars of the game. That includes Hilary Knight, Brianne Jenner, and Kendall Coyne-Schofield, who's been mentioned on this podcast before because she was the first woman to take part in the NHL All-Stars competition, and also has been doing commentary as well, so there's a little bit of the ice hockey version of Alex Scott, if you like. The statement that the players released doesn't explicitly mention the NHL or the Women's League, the NWHL, but it's believed that the players are standing in solidarity in the hope that their absence will actually help them create an NHL-backed league in the future. Part of their statement reads, "We are fortunate to be ambassadors of this game that we revere so deeply, and yet, more than ever, we understand the responsibility that comes with that ambassadorship to leave this game in better shape than when we entered it. That is why we've come together over 200 players strong to say it is time to create a sustainable professional league for women's hockey." This is also a very crucial time for the future of the women's game, because the NWHL is the last professional female league standing in North America, because back in March, the Canadian equivalent, the CWHL, announced that it will be folding, and it ceased operations last week. So there's now just one professional league left, and obviously it'll be very interesting to see how this pans out. As one hockey writer said, it's essentially going to show how much people care, whether it's the NHL, Duck, or sponsorships. See how much they actually care about the women's game.
In some ways, this reminds me a little bit of what happened in Argentina with the football, in terms of the players standing up and making their voices heard. So let's hope that things change, and that, what we basically don't see a repeat of what happened in Canada.
Pretty much. But yeah, very interesting to see how it pans out.
We'll stick with women's sport then, and another potential game changer has been occurring this week with the format of the Women's T20 Challenge, which is seen by many as a potential prelude to an IPL for women over in India. So there was just a one-off game last year, but there were 3 teams this year who have been playing in a round-robin, and then the final will take place on Sunday, so the day this episode is aired. International stars have included England's Danny Wyatt, who has top scored for her team in both games, Nat Siver, Sophie Eccleston, as well as Susie Bates and Sophie Devine of New Zealand. and Stefani Taylor and Hayley Matthews of the West Indies, but no South African or Pakistani players because they've had a tournament going, a series going on between themselves at the same time. And interestingly enough, no Australians were invited because of a dispute between Cricket Australia and the Board of Control for Cricket in India over a men's tournament. So again, politics once again having an influence on women's sport, which isn't actually their fault, which is a shame. But I guess this is a positive move in that there could be a potential new IPL women's tournament. It's just a shame that India's so far behind the times, because we already have one over here in England. Australia has one. New Zealand have plans for one, I believe. So why don't India, who have got the biggest fans, who've got the most passionate fans, who will have the fans, the fans will turn up to watch women's cricket because India cares about cricket. India is nuts for cricket. So it's strange that they haven't got anything at the moment, but again, money talks, and the less I say about what I think about the Indian Cricket Board, the better. But it's a positive step, and great to see English players out there, and again, Danny Wyatt scoring runs, Sophie Eccleston taking wickets, Nat Siver doing what she does best.
Money does talk, doesn't it? You mentioned this to me before we started recording, and we said how it hadn't been publicised anywhere near as much as we thought it should be. Yeah,
the only reason I really knew about it was because I follow the three English players that are out there on Instagram, and I'd seen that they were out there, and I tried to look up and see where you could find the results, and you could find them on the ESPN Cricinfo website, but they weren't massively publicised, and the BBC did a story about it yesterday, but it was very brief and it was hidden amongst all their other stories, so worrying, because last year's one-off game attracted a fair amount of coverage, whereas this has got nothing. And potentially it could be the start of something massive for women's cricket.
But going under the radar.
Yes, whether that's what the organisers want or not, I don't know. But it's not great. But hopefully next year we'll have a women's IPL of sorts.
Fingers crossed. My second story dives into the world of American football, but with a UK flavour. That is because the first ever NFL Academy is being set up here in London, designed to find and train athletes who might make it stateside one day. The Academy is going to open in September, and it's for 16 to 18-year-olds, and it will also offer BTEC and A-level qualifications alongside specialist coaching. The trials are scheduled to take place over the next 3 months, but this is obviously the latest move by the NFL to essentially grow its reputation in London and the UK. London-born Super Bowl winner Jay Ajayi, he's one of the ambassadors on this project, and he's obviously a big part of the promoting the sport over here as well. The 25-year-old moved to the States as a 7-year-old, but he said in relation to the Academy's launch, before this, London didn't have a lot of resources for that local kid who loves American football. Now they have a place where they can go and chase that dream. I suppose the last thing to mention is that the Academy will be based at Barnet and Southgate College in North London. But one thing I wanted to highlight really about the project is it puts forward the importance of combining your training and your sport with the education side. The fact that they're offering BTECs and A-levels, because how many times do we see young promising players come through from, say, football academies here, get churned through the system, don't end up making the grade for the first team, and then are sort of left with not much else to fall back on. Whereas actually they're putting qualifications and things on an equal playing field with your skill set on the field.
Yes, I agree with that, but on the other hand, why just London? There are going to be kids from all over the country who want to potentially have a career in American football, and it's not going to be easy for them to necessarily get to London. So why have we only come up with the one potential academy? Why not have 4 or 5 all opening at the same time? I know obviously money's a factor and blah blah blah, but it's a rich sport, so that's one thing. And also for only 16 to 18-year-olds, whereas in America these kids are playing gridiron or American football, whatever they call it, from the age of 5 or 6. And I know there's the whole argument around head injuries and stuff like that, and playing full contact American football, potentially you shouldn't be able to do that till you're 16 or 18. But again, is a side more likely to take someone who's been playing their entire life so far from the age of 5, or are they going to take someone who's had a couple of years training over in the UK, which isn't a hub for American football? They're still going to pick their own.
Yeah.
But it's a good initiative.
I presume it's also the next step of a London team arriving here at some point.
Yeah.
And probably putting in the foundations for that.
It's going to happen at some point soon, isn't it?
It's inevitable.
Like you've got Canadian and French teams in our rugby league structure. Why not have an English team in the NFL structure? My final news story is sort of a moan, because basically Liberty Media have lied to us. It's obviously therefore Formula One news. There's been a lot of developments around new circuits and new race calendars and things like that. So Vietnam has been confirmed to host a race in 2020, and there are talks to have a second Chinese Grand Prix on the calendar. This comes despite promises from Liberty to uphold the European tradition in Formula One. So they have made at last good moves to try and preserve this. Monza has all but agreed a new 5-year contract to host the Italian Grand Prix up until and including 2024, which is fantastic. But this weekend's Grand Prix being held at the Circuit de Catalunya in Barcelona, that contract runs out after this race. Silverstone contract runs out this year. Hockenheim's contract runs out this year, as does Mexico City, which is a brilliant race. Love that track. These are historical heritage sites of the sport, and it seems as though Liberty Media are more invested in money and taking everyone to new places, which isn't a bad thing, but these are places with no history of motorsport. If Liberty Media were to turn around and say, let's have a second race in Japan, which has a rich history in motorsport, I would say fair enough, fair play, I wouldn't mind that. China, though? Has China ever produced any properly good races? Shanghai is a decent circuit, always produces a pretty decent watch, but would we want to see a second race in China? I personally wouldn't. Again, am I excited for the Vietnam race? Not massively. I would much rather see the Dutch GP come back at Zandvoort, which they're potentially saying is going to happen. We'll see. Also, the Brazilian president says he plans to move the Brazilian Grand Prix from Rio away from Sao Paulo, which will also be a shame because Sao Paulo is a brilliant circuit. Just in time.
Just in time. But yeah, it's always strikes me as important that you have to have your history combined with taking the sport to new places. Fair enough. But do we run the risk of having essentially a Formula One season that is going to be circulated around nations where the races have been taken on because of money rather than because of history, and then you lose that rich history?
It was good to see France come back last year, and like I said, the potential for Zandvoort to be back on the circuit is really exciting, but you can't lose Italy, Germany and the UK. Three of the...
Well, they're stalwarts of the
exactly.
sport.
They're
in terms
where...
of drivers or whatever.
They and France are where the sport was built, where you get the best drivers, the best teams. It's a worrying time for Formula One. I'm slightly concerned for its future.
Your earlier hope and optimism seems to be diminishing.
Yeah, Liberty Media haven't really fulfilled much of what they said they were going to do.
And there we go.
There goes my chance of getting a job with them.
My final story then, after the incredible results, of course, in the Champions League and the Europa League this week, which means both finals will be an all-English club affair. And we've obviously touched on what happened in the Champions League already. But, as ever, with a lot of European competitions, there is naturally a downside to everything. And that's because supporters groups have called for an overhaul this week of UEFA's treatment of fans after just a third of the tickets were allocated to fans. Liverpool and Tottenham fans will share 33,226 tickets for the Champions League final, which is held in Madrid, in the 68,000-seat Wanda Metropolitana Stadium. Meanwhile, and this is probably the more damning statistic, Chelsea and Arsenal will share 12,000 of the 68,700 seats available in the stadium in Baku, which is where the Europa League final is taking place this year. So that's 6,000 tickets each, essentially. There are also criticisms over the locations of the finals, with fans needing a visa to enter Azerbaijan, for example, as well as battling soaring hotel and travel prices. Some of the Champions League final tickets as well have been listed on third-party sites for as much as £5,500, which is a lot of money for one game of football. Obviously very sickening, but it's something we are very used to seeing now, because we seem to be having the same conversation year after year whenever an English club gets to a final like this. Rather interestingly as well, UEFA put out this statement regarding, I suppose, the Baku final in the Europa League, saying, of course, it's impossible to predict in advance which clubs will reach the final, while the venue has to be chosen around 2 years in advance, as well as take into consideration the above. And here comes the duck. They said it was deemed that around 15,000 spectators would be able to travel from abroad with Baku as the main hub. So essentially they're kind of accepting themselves that Baku is a location that only so many fans can get to. So why hold it there in the first place?
Money. It's not just the fans who are going to struggle to get to Baku, though, as Henrik Mkhitaryan may not be able to play for Arsenal because of the diplomatic tension between Kazakhstan and Armenia. Didn't he miss the trips to Kazakhstan in the group stages or last year's tournament? And so they're going to have to apply to get him a visa, but it could well be rejected because of the fact he's Armenian.
At the same time UEFA released that statement that I read out, Arsenal also released a statement of their own saying that they were looking for guarantees from UEFA regarding the safety of Henrik Mkhitaryan, and up to this point they haven't had those guarantees yet. And time is ticking.
Yes.
But anyway, on that positive note, we'll bring the news roundup section to a close. We've got more football chat, specifically Lionesses chat, in our discussion section after this. Follow SportSpiel Pod on Twitter, Facebook and on Instagram, or go to our website sportspielonline.com. Moving on to this edition of our discussion section, and we are talking all things Lionesses, as the England squad for the World Cup was announced in very stylish fashion. The 23 players on the plane had their names read out on social media by 23 celebrities, including David Beckham, Greg James, Emma Watson, and of course, Prince William. Here is the squad for you in lightning fashion if you weren't aware of who had made the grade. Goalkeepers: Karen Barsley, Mary Earps and Carly Telford. Defenders: Millie Bright, Lucy Bronze, Rachel Daly, Alex Greenwood. The captain: Steph Houghton, Abby McManus, Demi Stokes and Leah Williamson. Midfield, we've got Karen Carney, Jade Moore, Jill Scott, Lucy Staniforth, Georgia Stanway, Kira Walsh, and forwards: Tony Duggan, Fran Kirby, Beth Mead, Nikita Paris, Jodie Taylor and Ellen White. So my first question, particularly after reading that forward line, because that is a very strong forward line, what do we think then of the squad overall that Phil Neville has opted for the tournament?
I don't think it's massively surprising. I think we could have all predicted every single one of those players was going to get in. Obviously, there's a couple of players there without many caps to their name, but they've been part of his plans of recent times. So I didn't see any massive surprises of people who'd made the squad. Obviously, then you look at some of the players who've missed out and think they could make the squad even better. But at the same time, he has his reasons for not picking them. And yeah, I look at that squad and all over the park, there's talent, there's quality. I don't see any weaknesses in there at all, to be honest.
In terms of players then who've missed out and could have a claim for being in that 23, I suppose the name that's cropped up most of all is Farrah Williams, who of course hugely experienced, so many caps to her name, and of course was part of the last couple of squads for the major tournaments as well. I suppose the main argument in her favour, as well as obviously she's a very talented player, but because, this is an argument I'm stealing from commentator Robin Cowan, the fact that we don't have Jordan Nobbs in the squad because of her injury, would Farrah Williams' inclusion and her experience have helped in the dressing room, even if she wasn't actually playing in the tournament?
It might well have done, but you have players in that squad who have been to tournaments before, 2-3 tournaments, players who've got over 100 caps. So she would have been another added voice to them, and of course she's the most capped female player of all time, if not the most capped England player of all time, men and women. Might need to double check that stat. But yeah, obviously her experience would have been vital, but she wouldn't have been the only one, because of the likes of Jill Scott, Steph Houghton, Tony Duggan as well. A lot of those players have been there, done that before. So the younger players like Williamson, like Georgia Stanway, will have already had them. I don't know. It's difficult. As someone who follows Reading women quite closely, definitely would have liked to have seen Farrah Williams in there again. She scored goals for fun this season. If you look at the BBC's goal of the season montage, she features twice, with curling efforts into the top corner, one with the left foot, one with the right foot. And she's an exceptionally talented player. She's a real driving force behind that Reading team, who would have deserved to have gone. But again, it's difficult to... Who would you take out from that squad to replace her with? And the same with Jordan Nobbs, to be honest. Obviously, Nobbs would have gone, but who would you take out of that squad? Maybe the likes of Staniforth or Walsh, maybe, but you'd still want them in your team.
With Jordan Nobbs not in that team, who does the owners sort of fall on in midfield to control things? Because I suppose, since we're going along with the Reading line, Jade Moore is probably someone who is arguably quite underrated and probably will be the one to step in and sort of fill that Jordan Nobbs role, if you like.
Yeah, and Kira Walsh as well. We all saw what Kira Walsh could do at the She Believes Cup.
At FA Cup final last weekend as well.
She's a brilliant young player. And I think Jill Scott seems to have taken up a more defensively minded role in recent times from what I've observed. So I think she'll step in. Kira Walsh is, as we said, a great talent. And Jade Moore, I think she's been unlucky this season with injuries, but clearly she's a player that Phil Neville trusts. To have picked her despite not having had too much game time for Reading, he clearly likes what she brings to the team, and he clearly values her work rate and her skill. So I think obviously with Nobbs not being there, her position is still filled, and there's still so much quality, and it's just great to see the strength and depth of this England squad at the moment in time.
One more name that missed out and has been bandied about by a few people as possibly someone who could have got into that team is Beth England of Chelsea, who of course has kind of had a bit of a breakthrough season up top for Chelsea this season. 11 goals in 17 games for that club. Is she unlucky to not really get a look in when someone like Jodie Taylor, considering what she's done in the past for England, of course, hasn't had the best of seasons goal scoring wise?
I think you say this season was a breakthrough for Beth England, but I think the last couple of years she's been
because she was on loan at Liverpool the season before the one has gone.
She's been a fantastic player for Chelsea and Liverpool for a few years now, and this season was when she broke through as a goal scorer, but her talent was already there for everyone to see. And I think it is unfair that she's not even really been mentioned. No one was ever considering her for an England call-up. But then you look at that forward line, and it's like, who do you have to take out someone to fit Beth England?
I know some people have been mentioning taking out Jodie Taylor in favour of Beth England, but
Jodie Taylor brings that experience,
and she brings so much more than goals as well. She brings creativity
as
well as that forward line.
I mean, you could say the same about Ellen White. Ellen White has missed a large chunk of the season injured, but you want her, if she's fit, you want her in your team, and she came back for Birmingham this season, scored goals for fun when she was fit. So,
yep. And another player who probably would have been in the squad if she was 100%, Izzy Christiansen. Of course, doubts about her inclusion for quite some time now because she's been coming back from injury, and she has been omitted. Very disappointed for her because she essentially moved to St George's Park to try and get fit for the competition, and essentially she is fit, she's just not match fit, which is why Phil Neville has opted against including her. I know she's got plenty more tournaments to come, but I don't know if having her, because of her quality, even if she isn't 100% match fit, would have benefited that squad anyway.
That's a decision that obviously Phil Neville will have debated about long and hard, but I guess in his thoughts, whereas other players like Moore, like White, have come back from injury and have played for their clubs, Christensen hasn't been able to play as much, if at all, for Lyon since it was quite a nasty injury as well. I think the initial fear was she was never going to make it at all, so the fact that she's managed to get back and be fit is testament to her, really. And it's such a tough one because she is an outstanding player. There's a reason why she plays for arguably the best women's team in the world in Lyon, and that's because she is so good. But he's made that decision, and we'll see whether he lives to regret it, or whether the players he's picked will be good enough and ready enough to do that same job.
Lots of strength and depth, like we've said. Lots of options as well. On that front, we'll obviously go into this in more depth the closer we get to the World Cup. But I suppose one big talking point, Lucy Bronze, best right back in the world. Do we still see Phil Neville persisting with her in midfield?
I don't really know what he's going to do, actually, to be honest. But who is the alternative right back, I guess, in this
I
England
suppose Rachel
team?
Daly's been playing there.
But Rachel Daly can play literally anywhere, can't she? She plays up front, she plays left back, she plays right back. I don't know, he might try it in the first game. I feel like this is an experiment that as soon as something goes wrong, he'll stop doing it. Hopefully nothing does go wrong, but you know, I think we've got to look at the warm-up games coming up against Denmark and the other couple of games just to see what sort of shape he tries. But yeah, I think Lucy Bronze is good enough to play in that midfield role, but
she just adds so much at right back.
Would we rather have her in her strongest position? And I would say I'd rather see her playing at right back.
Likewise. In terms of the social media announcement, because it got a lot of attention for the way it was done, very classily done as well, by getting all these celebrities to announce the names of the players. And how much of an impact do you think that's had on gaining traction? Because arguably a big part of this World Cup and the FA's remit is to bring in a whole host of new fans to the women's game. And I think that was a really clever move in getting it up and running right from the off.
Yeah, I think, as I've written about on the 52 this week, I think it's brilliant. What they did was a game changer and showed just how much more seriously they are taking women's football. The FA, they are actually giving their women a platform now, and there was no subtlety about what they did. This was a very much, we are going to broaden our fan base as much as possible before the tournament, and this is how we're going to do it. Whereas last year, the focus on the men's squad announcement was more about highlighting the diversity of the sport. This was very much about, here are our players, world, have a look at them. But the way they did it, so we were lucky at England Hockey to get Emma Watson in for a video last year. It wasn't directly related to our World Cup, but it was basically, we released it just before our World Cup. And we opened our sport to potential 80 million new followers. That's her combined Twitter and Instagram feed. The combined Twitter and Instagram and Facebook feeds of these guys is going to be upwards 100 million plus, or well over 100 million, potentially even 1 billion. So what they've done is fantastic, but the trick is now for the FA, they have to keep pushing. They can't just sort of sit back and say, all right, our work is done, we don't need to talk anymore. These messages need to be put out there. If they can use these celebrities again to get them to keep talking about the tournament before the tournament. So, for example, if James Corden could be at one of the friendlies, say against Denmark, again, just keeping that momentum going. If then Hermione Granger, if Emma Watson puts out another video on just the day before the tournament saying, "Good luck, girls. Can't wait to watch you live on Channel 4 at 7 p.m." That sort of thing. They just need to make sure they keep doing that. But if anyone has had the clout to pull this off, it's the FA. And if anyone is going to make this a success and massively enhance the following of the women's game, it's the FA. So
their comms department is incredibly classy and very good at what they do.
As someone who works in comms, I was just sitting there thinking, like, this is incredible, but I'm so annoyed that we never thought of anything like this, and also that we would just never get the traction they have, because they've got the following, they've got the money, resources, contacts, and it shows. But they've used that brilliantly.
Yeah. Tiny little thing, I would have liked to see Harry Kane announcing Steph Houghton on the video rather than Prince William. But tiny little pointer.
Well, as the president of the FA, Prince William had to.
But I kind of wanted him to do the overall message.
I did like seeing Raheem Sterling though announcing Georgia Stanway. We've seen them interacting on social and stuff before, so we know that they're close. But again, for me, it was also showing how much more mature Sterling is.
If you were a player getting announced, who would you want your announcement video to be delivered by?
So I would obviously be hoping for call up to the England cricket squad. So for me, I guess my first proper cricketing hero was Marcus Trescothick. So that would be pretty cool. Or who else? Someone like Jess Ennis-Hill obviously would be amazing. But in a cricketing sense, Marcus Trescothick, James Anderson, or Paul Collingwood. What about you?
Good shout. Well, tragically, my first footballing hero was Paolo Di Canio, but I didn't know what fascism was at that age. So it's a real sticking point for me at the moment. But on that note, I would always love to be announced by Mark Noble. Just throwing that out there.
Captain, leader, legend.
Captain, leader, legend. Final question, and again, this is something we'll delve into more the closer we get to the tournament, but very quickly, where will England finish at the World Cup?
England will make the final.
See, I'm going to sound really cynical now after that. I think they'll finish 4th.
I think if England can get out... England are in a very, very tough group. If they can get out of that, I believe they could definitely make the final.
They're capable, but I think what's maybe been lost in the discussions beforehand, something that's been mentioned by a few people this week, is we've forgotten how much other countries have gotten stronger as well as we have. Different playing field.
But England has also proven with recent friendly wins and the She Believes Cup win that they've also got stronger. And obviously they would be very disappointed with what happened at the Euros 2 years ago. So and a lot of that team played at that tournament. So they'll be wanting to put those wrongs right. I genuinely think they can make the final. Don't know if they can win it though. But you never know.
We will see. Either way, we will see. And of course, as the tournament grows ever nearer, we will be doing some extra bits and bobs podcast-wise in covering that tournament. That's a hint there for listeners.
Keep your ears tuned.
There's stuff coming. Anyway, that is it for the discussion section. We're going to have a quick, short break with more to come after this. Now we come to my favourite part of the show. It's Ask Alasdair, where I essentially get asked a question and either look slightly impressive or a bit of a moron. So, what have I got coming my way this time?
So the themes this week are countries. So the choice is A or B.
Which helps me greatly. Let's go B.
Fair enough. So last time out, just to keep you in suspense for a bit longer, Alasdair correctly identified sumo wrestling as the national sport of Japan to take his total to 1.5 points. This week, your question is, which country hosted the first ever motorsport Grand Prix race, which was held back in 1906? So obviously Formula One wasn't founded until 1950, but there were Grand Prix before that. But where did they first originate?
So my historic motorsport knowledge is completely empty. I'm just going to have to pick a country out of thin air here. Let's say Italy.
The clue is in the question. Grand Prix.
France?
France it was.
I think
So
a
you
half a
lose a
point.
point. So you're down to half a point. How do you feel right now?
I need a moment. Thank you.
So the question now for the audience, which you could have had. What is the only country to have qualified for every men's FIFA World Cup? That is the question for the audience this week. It's quite a simple one. I got it within 2 seconds. Just saying. And Alasdair has also got it.
Yay!
He's feeling even worse about life
I
now.
picked the wrong question.
So that was another edition of Ask Alasdair.
Right, after that disappointing result, it's nearly time for the show to end. Before we go, we have some final messages for everyone. As always, you can follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. All of our handles are SportSpiel Pod, so you can find us there. And of course, you can always email us whatever is on your mind. Our address is sportspielpod@gmail.com. Likewise, you can use that to send in your answers for the audience question that you got a moment ago, which I got right and foolishly didn't pick at the start. Joke's on me. We have some specials coming up because you may have noticed on social media and in the news that it's quite a big summer of sport, for women's sport in particular. Next episode will be the 23rd of May. What have we got on that date?
So 23rd of May, marks 50 days until the Women's Netball World Cup in Liverpool gets underway. And we have been in contact with Conquer Communications once again, who set up the interview with Jade Clark. And we will be bringing you 3 interviews in one long special. Jade Clark will be reappearing on the show, which we cannot wait for. She will be joined by a representative from the Northern Ireland and the Scottish teams who are also going to be at this summer's tournament. Not entirely sure who yet, but we're very excited. It's going to be a good special and it's going to be a brilliant summer.
Exactly. Then, straight after that, it is of course the Women's World Cup, the FIFA World Cup in France, which starts on the 7th of June. In the week before that, we have got a series of specials, a bit like what we did with Mental Health Awareness Week last year and our Winter Olympic specials. We've got some World Cup content coming your way. We've got some interviews already lined up. We've got one already done and dusted, which will be exciting. It does involve an England player of the past who was at the last World Cup.
And potentially an England player of the current squad could be on the show as well.
Is in the works. We're working on that one. Likewise, we've got a couple of discussion sections, or discussion episodes rather, in the pipeline as well, because we have a few women's football experts that we know who we will get on to get their trusted opinions, because they're certainly more worthwhile than our opinions.
I question that.
Thank you. But yes, we're looking to do plenty of stuff before the tournament actually starts, and once the tournament gets underway, we'll be doing some extra coverage as well, both written on our website and in podcast land as well. And then, of course, the Netball World Cup is coming straight after the Football World Cup, so it's a very jam-packed couple of months coming your way, but a very exciting couple of months. I think that is it in terms of announcements that I need to dish out to everyone. Go follow us on social media. Go find us on Apple Podcasts and give us a like and a rating. That would be always very helpful. And with that is it from us on episode 38 of SportSpiel. Do have a good time until we return, listeners. Enjoy all the sport that's to come. There's plenty of it. We will see you very soon.